Unmute.
All right, Event Trader here. We are bringing in Carmine Atteo, Special Situations Analyst. Real quick, somebody was asking what his credentials are. All they could find is that he's a poker player from Chicago. That would be part of his credentials. He actually has been in Vegas the last 2 weeks playing in the World Series of Poker, and I believe, Carmine, you won yourself a free entry next year by winning one of the tables, correct?
Yeah, so I got some going to the main event next year, so I'm excited about that, and we'll see how it goes.
Yeah, well, congratulations on that. And
Thank you.
outside of being a pretty savvy poker player, Carmine's been with us for 9 years now, and he does yeoman's work over on the in-play side. Puts together all of the tariff pieces for us, and follows real closely the geopolitical developments. Real savvy guy on the subject, and like I said, has been doing it for us for about 9 years. Posts a ton of the earnings, a lot of the headlines, a lot of the interview coverage that you see going on. He covers all that information. So he's really got his finger on the pulse, which is why we
Thanks,
like
man.
bringing him in and talking about these geopolitical situations. And he'll be able to rattle off the details for you outside of what the headline noise is. So it's always good to get him on here and kind of give us a lay of the land. So, Carmine, we are playing a little bit of catch up here since you were out the past week and a half or so. Obviously, the one thing that you missed was the Mexico immigration agreement. So, you want to give us a rundown of where we stand on that? Because I know yesterday one of the things that had the markets a little concerned was the president noting that I believe he had laid out a 45-day plan for some things to kind of fall into place. So, why don't you give us an update on what happened and where exactly we stand on this Mexico immigration agreement?
Yeah, so let's start off from the beginning just to keep everybody up to date. As you know, the day I left, President Trump threatened tariffs against Mexico if they didn't solve the illegal immigration situation at the border, and so about a week later, though, he backed off of that because Mexico agreed to some things they already agreed to a few months ago. But the one new thing was that they increased the amount of National Guard troops on the border. So that put them aside for now. They put the tariffs aside for now. But I wanted to talk about there is one key difference between what he was threatening here in the Section 232 and 301 tariffs that we're so familiar with, become so familiar with over the last couple of years. So the process is a little different. What he wanted to do with Mexico was declare a national emergency. Now, what that does is it automatically triggers a vote in Congress to try to override the emergency. So it's a little bit hard to follow, but the vote in Congress to override the emergency can be vetoed by the president. So essentially, they would need 67 senators and two-thirds of the House in order to override the national emergency. If Congress wanted to do that, I do mention that because after this plan was initially announced, there was several Republicans that came out against the proposal to put tariffs on Mexico. Now, whether they will follow up their words with actual actions to vote against it, remains to be seen. But if, let's say, the 90 days pass and the president is not happy with the progress being made on the border, and he decides that he wants to go forward with these tariffs, which I have no information that he's going to do. I'm just saying, putting this out as a hypothetical. Then that national emergency would be triggered, and there'll be an override vote in Congress automatically triggered. So it'll likely pass both houses, but then he'll veto it. And the question is if there will be the question is if there was enough votes to override it, then the tariffs would not be able to go into effect. So that's a little bit different than the USTR Section 232 tariffs, where he can do these basically on his own, and Congress, is against it in some ways. In China's case, they're all for it, so they're not going to try to override that. But in this particular case, they can because it's a national emergency declaration.
Okay, that's an interesting aspect of it. So we'll obviously have to continue to see and take the pulse of the overall Senate there, because this is something that the president could tweet about, but still see a little bit of a revolt in Congress. And real quick, just keeping an eye on the S&P as this slips to the session lows here. That's getting through that 28.85 level, so a little bit of weakness, but as we would note that volume does remain light here, so keep that in mind. But this could quickly dip down to that 28.80 level here. So, Carmine, just circling back then real quick. While the president could tweet about this, this is something that he could see a little bit of a revolt from his party against then.
Yeah, exactly. Now, again, let me just put out the caveat that there were a lot of Republicans, including Ted Cruz and Lindsey Graham, two pretty good allies to the president, came out against these tariffs. Now, whether they would follow up their words with actual votes against it remains to be seen. But I think the part of the tell here to see if these tariffs return to the table will be the illegal immigration data. Now, I've been following this situation for a while now, and I just don't see how repackaged proposals from Mexico are going to solve this issue. It's not to be negative on it. I just don't see that happening. Like I said, the only really new thing that they announced was an increase of some National Guard troops on the border, and so once the legal immigration numbers into Mexico from Mexico into here are right now at a 13-year high, according to the New York Times. So if those continue to rise or stay at those levels, I think it's likely that the president will we'll bring up these tariffs once again in about 90 days. He said 45, but the actual agreement on the State Department's website says 90, so there's a little bit of confusion on that. But this could be a negative headline as we go into the next couple months ahead that people need to watch out for in case, in case these legal immigration numbers do not come down.
All right. So let's take a look then and move over to the China trade talks. While you're out there is the G20 finance ministers meeting over the weekend. And it doesn't seem like the two sides have come out and agreed to a meeting just yet between President Trump and President Xi. I know President Trump has said if the Chinese leader doesn't meet with him at the G20, then he's going to push forward for the for the tariffs on the additional 25 or 300 billion, the 25% tariffs. Now, I know we had the hearings this week on Monday and Tuesday. So, Carmine, where do we stand with the China tariffs? Just maybe a quick explanation on the deadline for that 25% tariff on the 200 billion tranche that's set to go into play over the weekend. And then what's the possibility that the president could speed up the review of the other 300 billion tranche that's currently being heard?
Yeah, so let's start with the $200 billion tranche. The USTR extended the deadline on that for certain products. Now, this is just a technicality to account for shipment time between the U.S. and China, between China and the U.S. rather, by boat. So a lot of the tariffs went up to 25%. Any products coming by plane went up to 25% back in May. But any products coming by boat, they want to make sure that everything gets matched up properly. So they delayed some products. The tariff rate increase on some products to 25% until June 15th, which is Saturday. So on Saturday, everybody should have all their ducks in a row between the U.S. and China, and that tranche should be at 25% for both. On the U.S. Imports and on the U.S. exports, which China put tariffs on $60 billion worth of U.S. exports to China, and that should go up to 25% as well. So everything should be 25% as far as that tranche on each side starting on Saturday. Most of it is now, but it's just a technicality that they delayed some certain products due to shipment time from China to the U.S. As far as the next tranche, Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin said that China trade talks are unlikely to make any progress before the G20 meeting where President Trump is expected to meet with Chinese President Xi. Now, for China's part, they're a little bit more cautious on whether or not the two leaders would meet. That they haven't put out any definitive statements that the two would meet. Now, President Trump was called in to CNBC while I was on vacation, as far as I understand, and he said that if President Xi doesn't want to meet with him or doesn't meet with him for whatever reason, that these tariffs would immediately go into effect. So the G20 meeting is going to be a next big event here to keep an eye on. There's a couple of ways that this can go. One is that the two leaders agree to keep talking and to delay the tariffs on a $300 billion tranche, or number two, that they continue to talk tough, and President Trump puts the tariffs on the $300 billion. Now, the Commerce Department put out an accelerated timetable for the review period, so that means that the tariffs could go into effect as early as late June. So that's something to keep an eye on there.
Okay, Carmine. What should we be looking out for then ahead of this G20? I mean, as we just stated, they don't have a definitive meeting yet. Obviously, there could be a tweet from the president, but what are some of the hints that you'd be looking for that would suggest that the two sides are getting closer to meeting at the summit in Japan?
I would like to see somebody from China confirming the meeting, because they haven't done that yet. I would either have to see somebody from the Vice Premier Liu He, or from some official over in the Chinese government confirming that that President Xi will meet with President Trump, because on the U.S. side, that they're saying that this meeting's a go, and the President Trump has no problem meeting with Xi. But on the China side, they've been a little more subdued. They haven't really come out and said, "Hey, we're going to meet." And so I think it'll be a positive for the markets if the Chinese put out a statement saying that they will definitely meet at the G20. Now, whether or not anything comes out of that meeting, it remains to be seen. Again, these tariffs could go into effect as early as late June, and these timetables are intersecting with the meeting, and that's not by accident. The Commerce Department set that up, in my opinion, on purpose to make sure it connects exactly with the meeting at the G20. So the G20 meeting is a pretty high-stakes meeting for the markets.
Okay. Just keeping an eye out on some USTR headlines rolling across. Excuse me. Their office denied Tesla a request for tariff relief for some Chinese-made Model 3 car computers. That's according to a letter. So just keeping an eye out on that. Tesla's dipping a little bit on that headline.
Yeah, that's actually a good point to bring up. There's going to be the hearings are going on this week. So they started on Monday. I'm sorry, the hearings do start on Monday. So there's going to be a lot of Monday, June 17th. So there's going to be a lot of companies asking for waivers or asking for relief from these tariffs. Now, the vast majority of them will not be granted. Unless you're Tim Cook from Apple, you are probably not going to be able to get an exemption. As you know, Gavin, that the Apple Watches and AirPods are exempt from tariffs, and that deal seems to be remaining in place because, according to the USTR language, that any exemptions made prior will still apply, even if these $300 billion tariffs go into effect. So it looks like Apple's exemption is safe as far as their AirPods and their Apple Watches, which is not really a big part of their business, but it's definitely something. So. But I would expect to see a lot more of these types of headlines crossing over the next few days that these exemptions were denied. Or again, there might be some approvals here and there, but I would expect that most of them would be denied.
Okay, so headlines that we should be expecting to see. So, Carmine, let's just take a quick look ahead at some of the congressional hearings that are coming up and put that on people's radar. Starting with today, right now, there's a hearing on national security challenges of artificial intelligence. Any idea who might be a witness at that hearing?
They didn't put out a witness list, but I wanted to put it out to everybody that probably won't see too much coming out of that, but we'll definitely keep an eye on it. It started at 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock Eastern, so we're 2 hours in. I haven't seen any news from it yet, but we'll be keeping an eye on it.
Okay, then June 17th on Monday morning at 9:30 a.m.
That will be the USTR, first day of the USTR public hearing that I mentioned on the potential $300 billion tariff tranche. Again, the key here will be a lot of the companies here will be coming there to air the grievances, so to speak, and a lot of them will be requesting exemptions. So it will be remaining to see which exemptions be granted, but I wouldn't expect too much to be granted.
No witness lists released yet, I'm assuming.
No, they haven't yet, no, but I would expect a lot of companies to be participating.
And
Tesla, Apple, Boeing, and all those.
Okay, then finally next Wednesday, it's going to be a Fed day, so probably going to get overlooked, but
Yeah.
Another Senate hearing.
Yeah, there'll be a Senate hearing on prescription drug prices. First, there'll probably be a lot of these over the next couple of years. So, again, look at the IBB stocks there. So, for any headlines on that. As far as just circling back to Mexico, though, I wanted to point out some stocks that might be impacted if these tariffs come back to the table.
Sure.
Of course, the automakers. And of course, CBGW, DEO, the winemakers, STZ and TAP. So, of course, the steel names as well. So I think those are some names people need to look out for in case some of these Mexico tariffs. I read your comment from Monday, saying that basically that, hey, it's great that we have this deal with Mexico, but the president can change his mind at any minute, and that's 100% true. So, I completely agree with that. So
it's the weaponizing of tariffs that I think is the problem that the markets are going to have eventually. Because
absolutely.
What's negotiating if you could all of a sudden have somebody switch on a dime and throw a tariff on you?
Yeah, exactly. And just to kind of throw this out there, if the president feels that he got some concessions out of Mexico, again, like I said, to put the facts on the table. Most of the things in this agreement were agreed to before. The National Guard troop increase was new, but most of it was agreed to before. But if the president feels like he got a win from this, he always is critical of Germany for the NATO not paying the 2% they're required to pay for NATO. I'm just throwing this out there. He could, say, use the same tactics against them. I do think Congress would revolt in that case. I do think Congress would revolt in the Mexico case as well. So that's why I wanted to point out that this process is a lot different than the 232 tariffs, which he basically has carte blanche for do what do whatever he wants on. But as far as the national emergency declaration, it does automatically trigger a vote in Congress, which is very important because if there's enough senators that are against it, they could be overridden. So.
Any thoughts of the Nord Stream 2 pipeline kind of playing into some of these tariff headlines potentially, or like using that as a bargaining chip? Or
that's a very good point because, like I said, the president has criticism against Germany for several things, and that pipeline is one of them. NATO spending is another. So I mean, I wouldn't want to speculate at this time. He hasn't said anything. I just want to make that clear. He hasn't made any. There hasn't been any reporting on this, but it's just something to keep an eye on. Because as like you said on Monday in your comment, it's the weaponization of tariffs for non-economic reasons such as immigration or NATO payments. It will definitely be a negative for the market. So, I don't mean to sound so negative that this might happen or this might happen. I have no information that it would, but it's just something to keep an eye on.
Okay, and for those not knowing, Nord Stream 2 is a massive gas pipeline being built by Gazprom, or at least led by Gazprom, that is more or less going to supply the entire Europe with natural gas. So real concern about Russia's influence of power, given such a move there by the president, has really put it on a lot of people's radars. So, Carmine, that is going to do it for our segment here. Good to have you back, and congrats on the nice poker wins there. Shows how savvy you are, though, if you're able to outsmart. How many people were in on the
800.
So 800 people, and you were able to take home. That's some nice poker playing there, my friend.
Yeah, thank you, man.
Hopefully you could win the big one next year, and we'll see you on TV, and you could give me a couple of dollars for being a buddy.
Then my Google results will be a lot more plentiful than they are now.
Yeah. So, anyway, Carmine, always a pleasure talking to you. We did tape this segment, so we'll post it here shortly for anybody that wants to hear it again. And thanks for taking the time, Carmine.
Thank you, Gavin.